Hey everyone, welcome back to Courtside Zone. I'm your host, Ariana, and do I have an absolute bombshell of a story for you today? Seriously, grab your popcorn, maybe a seat, and prepare to have your mind completely blown, because the tennis world is officially turning upside down. We are talking midnight phone calls, panicking tournament directors, millions of dollars on the line, and a sponsor mutiny so intense that it literally forced the rigid, rule-obsessed WTA to completely bend the knee. And sitting right at the center of this massive, unprecedented storm, a 20-year-old phenom from the Philippines who has single-handedly proven that star power doesn't give a damn about ranking points. That's right, we are talking about the one and only Alex Eala. Let me paint a picture for you, because you really need to understand the sheer drama of how this all went down. The call came in the middle of the night. We are talking 3 a.m. in Mallorca, Spain. Now, a time like that is when even someone like Rafael Nadal, a man who has been grinding on the global tennis tour for literal decades, someone who is completely accustomed to the weird time zones and crazy global rhythms of professional tennis, would expect nothing but silence. You don't get good news at 3 a.m., right? But the phone rings, and he picks it up anyway. At first, Nadal naturally assumed it was something routine. Maybe it was an urgent update from the Rafa Nadal Academy, some news about one of the young players he mentors, or perhaps a sudden logistical nightmare regarding an upcoming event that just couldn't wait until morning. But what he heard instead instantly cut through the quiet of the Spanish night. The voice on the other end of the line wasn't calm. It wasn't professional and composed. It was urgent. It was strained. Honestly, it was borderline panicked. The Upper Austria Ladies Linz Open, a massive WTA tournament with over 35 years of prestigious history, was in serious, serious trouble. And I don't mean a minor issue like a leaky roof or a scheduling mix-up. This was a full-blown financial crisis. Ticket sales, which the tournament organizers had confidently projected months in advance based on decades of study, predictable growth, had suddenly completely collapsed. Entire sections of the stadium remained unsold. We are talking ghost town vibes. Sponsors, normally steady, predictable partners who just smile, shake hands, and hand over the checks, were now restless. They were questioning their long-term commitments. They were even hinting at a total withdrawal. And the reason for all of this chaos? It was shockingly simple, and it all revolved around one name. Alex Eala wasn't in the main draw. Now, let's rewind and look at the context here. The 20-year-old Filipino superstar, whose meteoric rise had absolutely electrified tournaments across multiple continents, had been left out of the main draw. Why? Because her ranking had slipped from number 29 down to number 45 following a brutal fourth-round loss to Karolina Muchova at the Miami Open. Now, on paper, if you were a traditionalist sitting in a boardroom, this exclusion made perfect sense. The rules are the rules. Her ranking dropped, so she lost her automatic spot. But in reality, on the ground, in the actual world where fans buy tickets and sponsors make money, this changed absolutely everything. Because this wasn't just another player missing from the lineup. This was the draw. This was the exact same player whose mere presence had completely overwhelmed crowds in Melbourne. This was the same player whose matches had driven massive, ridiculous surges in Dubai. We are talking about the same player whose custom jerseys had completely sold out within hours in Miami. Without her, the energy in Linz simply vanished. The hype was dead. And trust me, the sponsors noticed immediately. These were the very same brands that had watched her merchandise absolutely outperform their wildest expectations over the past year. They had seen her face absolutely dominate social media algorithms, trending worldwide every time she stepped onto a court. They understood, perhaps way better than the archaic WTA ranking systems ever could, her real, tangible value. And now, staring down the barrel of a disastrous week in Austria, these sponsors were sending a message to the tournament organizers. It was clear, it was direct, and it was incredibly uncomfortable. Their ultimatum? Give Alex Eala a wild card or prepare to lose millions. By the time the situation was fully explained to him over the phone, Rafael Nadal was no longer lying down. He was sitting bolt upright in bed, fully awake, just trying to absorb the sheer, terrifying scale of what he was hearing. Because in my personal opinion, this wasn't just about one random European tournament struggling to sell a few weekday tickets. This was something so much deeper. This was a monumental collision between tradition and transformation. It was a war between a rigid system built on old-school rankings and a brand new reality driven by global attention, fan connection, and cultural impact. And when he finally heard what the Linz organizers and possibly the Women's Tennis Association were considering doing next, even Nadal, the undisputed king of clay, a man who has quite literally seen everything this sport has to offer, was stunned. Let's talk about April 2026, Linz, Austria. The Upper Austria Ladies Linz Open was supposed to be a massive celebration. Its 35th edition. That is a milestone that very few tournaments ever reach. It promised a week of high-level tennis, bright lights, and packed, screaming stands. Champions from the past and the present, names like Ekaterina Alexandrova and Yelena Ostapenko, were all lined up to headline the event. Emma Raducanu was in the mix. The prize money had been generously increased by over $140,000 from the previous year, which was supposed to signal both growth and major ambition for the tournament's future. Everything, and I mean everything, seemed perfectly primed and ready for success. Then the numbers came in, and the celebration immediately turned to pure panic. The pre-sale reports were nothing short of devastating. Attendance projections that had been carefully built on decades of steady growth had completely collapsed overnight. Ticket sales were down over 40% compared to the previous year. 40%. Sessions that had always, historically sold out without a second thought, the quarterfinals, the semifinals, the championship final, were now barely half full. A massive financial loss loomed over the entire tournament like a dark cloud, a loss so severe that it legitimately threatened the event's very future on the tour. The cause? Oh, everyone in that boardroom knew exactly what the cause was. It was the absence of the Eala effect. This incredible, unstoppable force that had quite literally crashed ticketing systems at the Miami Open and driven a mind-blowing 48% surge in ticket sales in Dubai was nowhere to be found in Austria. Alex Eala, the 20-year-old Filipina who had, against all odds, become the single most magnetic and captivating player in all of women's tennis, was absent from the main draw. Her ranking had dropped from 29 to 45 after that tough fourth-round loss to Machova on the hard courts of Miami. The 390 points she had earned from her magical semi-final run back in 2025 had officially expired, pulling her down the ladder. And without her in the mix, the fans who had loyally traveled from continents away, the fans who had packed stadiums from Melbourne to Miami, simply didn't show up. They didn't book the flights. They didn't reserve the hotels. They kept their wallets closed. For the organizers in Linz, the irony must have been incredibly sharp and incredibly bitter. Think about it. They had spent 35 long years meticulously cultivating relationships with local sponsors, local media, and local government. They had invested heavily in expensive marketing campaigns, grassroots player development programs, and state-of-the-art facility upgrades. They had built a tournament that was dependable, professional, highly respected, and steeped in European tennis tradition. And yet, none of it mattered. Not a single bit of it mattered when the draw lacked Eala. Because the hard truth is, and honestly, the WTA needs to hear this loud and clear in women's tennis today, cold, hard numbers on a ranking board simply cannot compete with the sheer gravitational pull of a cultural phenomenon. Alex Eala wasn't just a tennis player to these people. She was a movement. She is an icon. And Linz had just learned the very hard, very expensive way what it felt like to try and run a tournament without her. Nothing else mattered to the ticket buyers. The fans hadn't come for the prestige of the tournament. They hadn't come for the brand. They had come for Alex Eala, and when they realized she wasn't going to be there, they stayed home. Now let's get into the juicy behind-the-scenes drama, because the sponsor meeting that followed was wild. It had originally been scheduled as a totally routine check-in. You know the drill. A quick review of the tournament's finances, a polite discussion of next year's tentative plans, the standard corporate cadence of a WTA 500 event. But the second those ticket sales numbers were projected onto the screen, the entire atmosphere in the room violently shifted. These sponsors are smart. They don't just throw money away. They had been closely following the Eala phenomenon for months. They had seen the numbers. They knew about the 48% ticket surge in Dubai. They had watched in awe as the Miami Open digital ticketing system buckled and crashed under the sheer, unadulterated weight of Filipino fans trying to secure seats. They had literally pored over the retail merchandise reports showing Eala's custom jerseys outselling every single other player in the field combined. To them, the calculation was incredibly simple, almost elementary. Eala equals revenue. So, looking at this Linz tournament, with its deeply depressing ticket sales and its rapidly aging traditional fan base, they realized it was failing to deliver the return on investment that they had come to expect. Voices sharpened. Ties were loosened. Questions aggressively demanded answers. When the sweating tournament officials awkwardly tried to explain that Eala's ranking had dropped and that she was therefore unfortunately excluded from the main draw based on the strict WTA rulebook, the reaction was immediate and it was brutal. Get her in, one major sponsor reportedly snapped across the table. We don't care how. Give her a wild card. Create a special exemption. Do whatever it takes. If she's not playing, we're not paying. Boom. Just like that. The ultimatum sent absolute shockwaves through the entire tournament organization. For the first time in its 35-year history, Linz wasn't just casually planning tennis matches and arranging floral displays for the VIP tent. It was scrambling in a sheer panic to navigate a massive financial crisis of its own making. A crisis that absolutely no spreadsheet, no marketing plan, and no amount of historical experience had prepared them for. Because this wasn't about logistics anymore. It wasn't about prize money distribution. It was about a single, 20-year-old player who had somehow become bigger than the sport itself. The WTA rules were always unambiguous. Wild cards were officially granted at the discretion of tournament organizers, yes, but they were historically reserved for local Austrian hopefuls, or maybe rising European stars who hadn't quite qualified by ranking. Under normal, traditional circumstances, Alex Eala, ranked number 45 and not from Europe, would have been completely ineligible for a handout like this. But as everyone was quickly realizing, these were far from normal circumstances. The Linz Open was staring down the barrel of a looming financial disaster. Sponsors were actively threatening to pull out and take their millions with them. Ticket sales had completely plummeted, and the only player capable of filling those empty stands, of reigniting the raw excitement and energy that the tournament desperately relied upon, was being blocked by an antiquated ranking system that completely ignored her true market value. Inside the WTA headquarters, the discussions were reportedly incredibly tense. Like screaming match tense. Some conservative officials stubbornly insisted that the rules must be upheld at all costs, no exceptions, arguing that bending the rules for one player would destroy the integrity of the tour. But others, the ones actually looking at the bank accounts, argued that the rules existed to serve and protect the sport, and if those rules were now actively preventing the sport from thriving and making money, it was high time to reconsider them. After all, rankings measured on-court performance, but they did not measure influence. They didn't measure charisma. They didn't measure the rare, undeniable ability to unite millions of fans across the globe. One anonymous WTA source captured the internal sentiment perfectly when they leaked to the press. Alex isn't just a tennis player, the official said. She's a phenomenon. And if the rules are standing in the way of the sport thriving, then maybe the rules need to catch up. I love that quote. I really do. Because in my opinion, tennis has been stuck in its ways for far too long. The debate underscored a massive, long overdue tension in modern tennis. It's the ultimate collision between structure and spectacle, between strict regulation and undeniable cultural impact. For the WTA, this was no longer just a quick decision about one tournament in Austria. It was a massive test of their relevance in a modern world where one single player could command attention far beyond the traditional confines of rankings or old-school metrics. And in the very eye of that massive storm, Alex Eala's name was the one that could either save or completely reshape the Linz Open entirely. Eala had already proven something absolutely undeniable. She could fill stadiums. She could sell out merchandise in minutes. She could bring a flood of brand new fans to tennis who had never watched a match before in their lives. That kind of profound influence has massive value, and the WTA desperately needed to find a way to recognize it, whether that was through wild cards, strategic seeding adjustments, or even a total reconsideration of how the ranking system measures a player's true overall impact on the sport. When the decision finally came down, it was unprecedented. It was historic. The WTA officially announced that Alex Eala would receive a wild card into the Linz Open main draw. The official statement cited extraordinary circumstances and formally acknowledged the player's significant contributions to the growth of women's tennis. The reaction on social media and in the press was immediate, loud, and incredibly polarized. Traditional critics furiously accused the WTA of bending its own sacred rules to accommodate a player who hadn't earned her spot by ranking points. They called it favoritism, but others, myself included, recognized it as a brilliant, necessary evolution. It was a massive acknowledgement that the sport and the way it engages with its fans was rapidly changing. The Eala effect had been quietly discussed in inner tennis circles for months, but the Linz crisis finally thrust it into the mainstream, into uncharted territory. The big question everyone in the media was asking was, why? Why was the presence of a single, 20-year-old player so absolutely crucial to a massive tournament's financial survival? The answer is simple, and it's beautiful. It's connection. For the massive Filipino diaspora scattered across the globe, Alex Eala is far more than just a tennis player hitting a yellow ball over a net. She is a living, breathing symbol of possibility. Think about her journey. A child from Manila who rose through sheer grit to stand on the world's biggest, most intimidating stages. She is visible, she is celebrated, and she is unstoppable. She completely embodies the overseas Filipino worker, OFW, dream, the powerful idea that incredible sacrifice, relentless effort, and unwavering belief can actually create something extraordinary. When players arrive from countries like the Philippines, where opportunities and funding in a sport like tennis are notoriously limited, the stadiums aren't just filled with casual fans, they physically transform. Every single cheer is amplified with deep national pride. Every banner held up in the crowd, every custom jersey worn, carries a deep personal story. Every fan in that seat is a loud, vibrant reminder that representation truly matters. Alex Eala doesn't just play tennis. She builds bridges. She bridges entire continents, cultures, and diverse communities. In Linz, that bridge was about to reopen, and the Austrian stadium was finally ready to feel what millions of people around the world already knew. Her presence is so much more than a game. It is pure inspiration in motion. It's like walking into a Davis Cup venue, one veteran tennis referee observed earlier in the year when talking about Eala's matches. People are cheering for their entire country, not just for one single player. And let's be real, that deep, emotional connection translates directly into massive economic activity. The numbers don't lie. In Dubai, ticket sales jumped 48% the second Eala was confirmed in the draw. In Miami, her jersey absolutely outsold every single other player in the field combined.
Back to Motion highlights that a strong core stabilizes the body during explosive movements and rapid direction changes,
the numbers
common
were
in tennis,
entirely undeniable.
thereby minimizing injury
Eala's presence
risk.
at a tournament generated millions in ticket revenue, massive merchandise sales, and huge media exposure. Her absence cost tournaments millions. The WTA, an organization which had spent years practically begging for a way to grow the game, had finally found a player who could actually deliver that explosive growth, and they initially had absolutely no idea how to handle it.